Ani, Adele Loosemore and Dejnakaz, Shebahonaning and Donjaba. Hello, my name is Adele Loosemore and I'm a Treaty Indian from Shebahonaning. My community is at the entrance to the North Channel of Georgian Bay, in the Robinson-Huron Treaty area. In this video, I'm looking at a letter that was published on orilliamatters.com. It was written by Jordan Plain. She is a member of the Métis Nation of Ontario, and she was the president of MNO's Youth Council. At the end of her letter, Jordan says that it's time for Métis and First Nations to have a dialogue. Maybe by the time you get to the end of this video, you will understand why I see that as just another one of MNO's self-serving statements. Back in April of 2024, there was a column published in orilliamatters.com titled "New Threat Could Erase Local First Nations Community." It referred to the erasure of First Nations people across the province as the federal and provincial governments grant rights to people who have not been required to substantiate their claims to Indigenous identity, nor to First Nations territory. Jordan Plain of the Métis Nation of Ontario responded with a letter, published under the title "Time for Métis First Nations to Start a Dialogue." She said that in Jeff Montague's column there were many inaccuracies, and the information in her letter is intended to clarify matters. Links to both stories are in the description box below this video. Here are the two paragraphs that I'll be talking about. I'm starting with the last sentence of this paragraph. It says our ancestors, meaning MNO's Métis ancestors, then petitioned the Crown for re-inclusion in present giving between the Crown, First Nations, and Métis in the Upper Great Lakes. First of all, annual presents were given by the Crown to First Nations people. They were meant to acknowledge an important nation-to-nation alliance. Here's a present list dated 1830. It's titled "Statement of Presents Issued to Indians at Penetanguishene," including those of Lake Simcoe, Matchedash, etc. It includes articles such as linen, striped cotton, blankets, sewing thread, awls, all kinds of supplies and equipment. A former Governor General said that he didn't want half-breeds to be included in the present giving. In 1840, the half-breeds at Penetanguishene sent a petition to the current Governor General. They had heard that other half-breeds around Lake Huron had received Indian presents for the last 2 years. They said they will be pleased if the Governor General will allow them to have the same advantages that persons of the same class living at the Sault Ste. Marie and other places on the shores of Lake Huron derive from the issue of Indian presents to them and their families. Samuel Jarvis was the Superintendent General of Indian Affairs. That's his picture on the screen. Mr. Harrison, the Secretary to the Governor, asked Jarvis for his opinion on the Penetanguishene petition for Indian presents. Throughout this video, I'll be reading excerpts from Jarvis's response to Harrison. Jarvis wrote, "I beg in the first place to observe that the petitioners are in error in stating that the half-breeds generally of the Sault Ste. Marie have received presents for the last 2 years. I have reason, however, to think that some few of them did, for it is extremely difficult to decide in many cases who are or who are not of that caste. Let's stop here for a moment. MNO claims that the half-breeds have a distinct culture separate from Indians, and they're living in their own Métis communities. You'd think they'd be easy to spot, but Jarvis says that in many cases it's very hard to tell the half-breeds from the full-bloods. Jarvis said it was the administration of Sir Peregrine Maitland, pictured on the right, who wanted Indian presence to be withheld from half-breeds. But there was never any official order or instruction about that given to anyone in the Indian Department. Jarvis said that it's half-breeds in the Lake Huron tribes, and elders in the Lake Huron tribes, and chiefs in the Lake Huron tribes, who have been telling him repeatedly that it is harsh and unjust to refuse to distribute Indian presents to the half-breeds. In the final paragraph of his letter, Jarvis makes it clear that on this issue he believes that Indian presents should not be withheld from the half-breeds. Back to Ms. Plain's letter. She says that in 1839-40, members of the Georgian Bay Métis community, she's talking about the half-breeds of Penetanguishene, confronted Indian agent Samuel Jarvis in Penetanguishene, surrounded his house, and threatened to burn it down if he did not deal with their unique Métis interests. Samuel Jarvis was not an Indian agent. He ran the Indian Department, and he didn't live in Penetanguishene. But in his remarks about the 1840 petition, he did refer to half-breeds surrounding the house he was staying in at Penetanguishene. Here's what Jarvis said. July last, when at Penetanguishene, a number of them surrounded the house I was in, for the purpose of claiming and insisting upon having that which they asserted was their right, as long as the distribution of presents to Indians was continued by government. And that's all he said. He didn't say they threatened to burn down the house. He didn't say that they threatened anything. You'd think he would have mentioned it if that's what happened. Instead, Jarvis's information shows that the half-breeds insisted on being treated the same as the Indians. How does that demonstrate their unique Métis interests? Now let's look at the second paragraph that I highlighted from Miss Plain's letter. She said that in response to the Penetanguishene petition, the Crown created the mode of excluding half-breeds from receiving presents. This policy recognized our community in Penetanguishene, and before that, Drummond Island, as being a distinct people of that territory who governed ourselves separately from neighboring Anishinaabe. However, it prohibited including Métis in present giving, which was an important diplomatic and relationship renewal custom between the Crown and Indigenous peoples prior to treaty. I'm going to talk about that policy in a minute. FYI, present giving was a custom for many years before and after treaties were made. The presents ended in 1858, 8 years after the signing of the Robinson-Huron and Robinson-Superior treaties. The man on the left is T.G. Anderson, Superintendent of Indian Affairs. In 1842, he submitted to the Legislative Assembly a policy titled "The Mode of Excluding Half-Breeds from Receiving Presents." The first paragraph says that the Governor-General is informing the Indian chiefs about this policy. They didn't want the white fathers or other white relatives of half-breeds to have access to those presents and trade them for other items. That type of thing had happened in the past. So they decided to break up those families. His Excellency wants all the chiefs and Indians to help make this policy successful. Here's the policy. No Indian woman or her children who lives with a white man shall receive presents. And if she separate from her husband, though she may be entitled as an Indian woman to receive, her children will not, unless they may be in every respect abandoned by their father, and are brought up as pure Indians in the tribe to which the mother belongs. No half-breed shall receive presents who does not live in the tribe and under the control of the chief to whose tribe he belongs. So to be eligible for Indian presents, Indian women and their half-breed children must live without the white father and in the tribe to which they belong. Adult half-breeds also must live in the tribe to which they belong. None of this recognizes a distinct Métis community anywhere. It's all about half-breeds belonging with their tribes. In this section, Anderson is talking about how he's going to enforce the policy. Drummond Island used to be a distribution point for presents, but by this time it was on the American side of the border. Let's go back to one of the claims Miss Plain made in her letter, that this policy recognized the Métis community at Penetanguishene and Drummond Island as a distinct people who governed themselves separately from neighboring Anishinaabe. But the policy is silent about where half-breeds are living if they're not living with their tribes. Who is the Governor General communicating with about this policy? The Indian chiefs. And who does the Governor General ask to assist the superintendents with making this policy successful? The chiefs and the Indians. There's no mention of informing Métis leadership about what's happening. A new policy that presumably would have a great effect on their families and their so-called Métis communities. Botaganasing, later called Drummond Island, is west of Great Manitoulin Island, where that blue arrow is. Here's some of the historical evidence available about the people who governed that territory. Here's a letter from John Johnson of Indian Affairs to Colonel Darling of the military forces. Montreal, 6th of March, 1825. Sir, in reply to your letter of the 28th of February, on the subject of the claim made by the Botaganasi Indians for compensation for the occupation of Drummond Island by His Majesty's government, I beg leave to state that, in my opinion, a donation equal in value to the usual annual presents would be of sufficient remuneration. And as the number of the tribe is small, probably about 300 souls, the expense of such a donation would not be very considerable. I have the honor to be, etc., 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 signed John Johnson, Superintendent General, Indian Affairs. Only 3 years before MNO's so-called Métis community on Drummond Island migrated to Penetanguishene, where the yellow arrow is, the Superintendent of Indian Affairs agreed that the Botaganasi Ojibwe should be compensated for government's use of their territory, Botaganasing, also known as Drummond Island. So MNO's Métis community on Drummond Island was not so distinct after all. The neighboring Anishinaabe were actually the governing Anishinaabe, who were living in the very same place.